All right, good morning. It's Friday, and that means it's Firearms Friday. We do have a story for you, and then there's a couple of things I want to talk about. As those of you who watch the show know, I've been on a bit of the art of war kick this week, and I'm going to mention it again today. The project right now, getting the Brushfire Mind underway, is it's in progress, and I really want to. I really want to reiterate with the Brushfire Mind, the plan, the project, the intent is to get as many people as I can to acquire a certain list of books, and I encourage you to go beyond that list and to acquire hard copies of books and film and music. Styx Hexenhammer has talked about getting older magnetic tape media that has a longer life than strictly digital medias, to make copies of films and music to protect them from the encroaching horde, from the censor horde. And I want to take that a step further as well. It is time to build a network. So anybody you know that fits the description, we need to reach out to them. Anybody who's in a position like a librarian at a public library or a school library, public or private, universities, K through 12, anywhere that there is a repository of literature, where we might see another infraction like the recent one where the librarian just threw hundreds of perfectly reasonable books into a dumpster to dispose of them. If we can get together a network of friendly librarians, I don't know. I don't know how many there are. I suspect the libraries are similarly infected by the social justice virus, in the same way as academia largely is, because it's hard to find a library that's not in a school that's over, and it's hard to find a school at all that's not overrun with basically neo-Marxists and censorship drones. But anywhere that the actionable intelligence can be assimilated to know when these books are about to be jettisoned by repositories of literature, such as the libraries or even bookstores. If those books can be saved, they must be. They must be. Because part of the activity right now, it's on the face of it, what it appears to be is that the left wing, the neo-Marxists, are interested in suppressing conservative thought. That's not the objective. The objective is Communist Year Zero, to delete the histories so that going forward the children do not learn that there is history. They're only ever exposed to the Marxist narrative. That's the objective. The way to combat that is by preserving the literature. So our hope, you plan for the worst and hope for the best. Our hope is that the Marxists fail. But our plan is that should they not, we have a strong foundational position to at least illicitly and underground continue the tradition of recalling and studying and learning from our history. It's very important. Like I said, Art of War, that should be on your shelf. And so should every major religious text. Okay? Get you a copy of the Bible, get you a copy of the Quran, get you some Taoist literature, some Buddhist literature, get you some satanic literature. Whether you agree with it or not, it is a position. And at the barest minimum, you should study the enemy so that you can know the enemy and know thyself. So, Speaking of the enemy, well, Biloxi resident fatally shoots intruder. Yes, intruders are the enemy. I haven't talked about this as much on the show as some other things, but let me give this a little bit of time today. If I had my way, all criminal punishment would be capital. And that is because, now, there's a lot of if coming into this. I would not say that all things which are currently criminalized by the legal code should be punished with capital punishment. First, I will make the argument before I get into all crimes being capital crimes. First, I will get into this. The first thing one is taught in law school essentially is crime is harm. Okay? If you cannot define a harm, then you're not showing a crime. I would go so far as to argue that under the current legal standards, civil litigation more reliably defines crime than does criminal prosecution. Because in civil litigation, you're alleging that an aggrieved party has suffered loss at the hands of the defendant. I was walking in your store and I slipped and broke my ankle, and I'm seeking to be made whole, as in I expect the store to pay my medical bills, because it was their negligence that caused my harm. There's an argument to be made that, and I actually subscribe to this generally, there's an argument to be made that, no, you should be paying attention and not stepping in slippery wet stuff. Okay, generally fair. Your individual safety is your problem, not mine. But let's just put that one down for a moment. As far as the crime is harm, there are many crimes on our books right now where harm cannot be shown reasonably. It is reasoned out of this abstract penumbra of general offenses. But, okay, I'll get back to you, Dave. You're right. It is abstracted out of this bizarre penumbra of general offenses. For example, drug laws. The funny thing about law causes crime. Now, when I say law causes crime, understand this. I do not mean that if you make smoking marijuana illegal, then people who smoke marijuana will be committing crimes. While that statement is axiomatically true, when I say law causes crime, what I mean is if meth use is criminalized, then the users of meth, who are now criminals because they use meth, will go on to commit other crimes to support their legally suppressed activities. Meth users, coke users, they will steal to support their habit. And when you get involved in stealing, you definitely set yourself up to be involved in murder. So, when I say that law causes crime, what I'm talking about is how the suppression by lawful authority of otherwise reasonable activities. Yes, I am making the argument that using marijuana or even cocaine or methamphetamine is a reasonable activity. That does not mean well advised, but those activities are no less reasonable than drinking. Okay, and which is to say that even drinking in excess is an incredibly bad idea. It's a good way. You might be a mean drunk, you might be a violent drunk, you might be a stupid drunk, right? There are plenty of people out there who get shit-faced drunk, and buddy, I'd rather they had consumed a commensurate amount of marijuana and flopped out on the couch to eat potato chips than, oh, I don't know, gone out driving. So let's get back onto this idea that crime is harm. When I say that crime is harm, I mean that I would eliminate, if you gave me a day with the pen, I would absolutely repeal every law that did not prohibit the causing of explicit harm. So the way that the lawyers wrangled and justified the passage of prohibition, and that's, there is no authority in the Constitution for the federal government to prohibit the use, the possession, consumption, distribution, or production of substances. Period. That power does not exist, and within the confines of the 10th Amendment, that power is therefore explicitly forbidden to the federal government, and less explicitly, but probably forbidden to the states' governments, because the 10th Amendment says that powers herein unenumerated are reserved to the states and to the people. I would argue that the authority over what one consumes, produces, and distributes is exclusively an authority of the people under the language of the Constitution. The argument made for the prohibition of substances and the classification of substances is under the Commerce Clause, where it says that the federal government is expected to make regular trade between the states. Understand that the concern at the time was that the individual states would pass tariffs against one another, and so if you were growing cotton in Georgia that you wanted to sell in Virginia, the federal government was supposed to step in if South Carolina tried to prevent you from transporting your cotton across their state to sell it in Virginia by imposing unreasonable tariffs. All right, to keep regular, to guarantee that disputes between the states had a reasonable arbitrator to make sure that states weren't taking advantage of one another and essentially conducting economic warfare and terrorism against one another. The idea to regulate, as in to write regulations, the use of that language, writing regulations, is an affront to our blessed mother tongue. To make a distinction between regulating and legislating is a semantic trick to allow for the abuse of the expectation that the federal government will make regular trade between states, explicitly so that the Commerce Clause can be used to victimize our precious legal system. That said, I would go so far as to argue that if it is to be considered a crime at all, it must be argued that the crime is a degree of murder. When you have property, you have that property because you have traded your time, your labor, your safety, sweat, blood, your precious treasure. You have traded for it. And if you haven't traded your life, blood, and time for that property, then you've traded something else for which you've traded your life, blood, and time. You have a finite amount of life on this earth. That is your wealth. What you can trade that time for in labor is wealth. Wealth, which is then traded for property, brings us around to this conclusion that life, time, money, property, currency, etc., are completely exchangeable media. Ergo, if you enter my home with the intent to deprive me of property, and not the intent to deprive me of my life explicitly, only to take my property, I will regard you, as should the law, as someone who is attempting to commit at least a degree, a modicum of murder, and the punishment should be commensurate. Now, have you not murdered someone and instead only deprived them of property, then perhaps it is not your total death that is required, that should be required by the law, but only such a deprivation of your properties as to return to me and make me whole, so that I am less murdered than I would have been had justice not been meted out. This argument extends to the obliteration of licenses, to the repeal of all unconstitutional prohibition laws, to the repeal and obliteration of all unconstitutional gun laws, to the repeal and obliteration of all unconstitutional anti-speech laws, and yes, that includes the idea that there is such a thing as a hate crime. We could talk about how much racism there is wrapped up in the concept of hate crime in another show, but I think you see where I'm going with this. And let's not forget, prohibition being enacted against substances in this country. I apologize. I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but we're going to roll with it for now. I think it'll make for a good conversation, and I'm kind of rolling anyway. Prohibition being enacted in this country without a constitutional amendment is, by constitutional precedent, unconstitutional. We had a period of prohibition. We enacted prohibition against the sale, consumption, distribution, production, and possession of alcohol in all its forms, right? And that was done by the 18th Amendment. The 18th Amendment. An amendment to the Constitution. And was undone by the 21st Amendment. An amendment to the Constitution. It was done by amendment because it is explicitly, by virtue of the 10th Amendment, that the powers here and unenumerated are retained to the states and to the people they are under. It is explicitly at being an unenumerated power of the federal government, not a power of the federal government. If the Constitution does not say the words, the federal government is allowed to X, then they're not. If you can't point to the federal government is allowed to do X, then the federal government can't do it. You know, welfare, for example. Churches got their wine just fine. That's... Okay, so that's one little carve out that really isn't that important. That's a whole other conversation. I've talked about the importance of Christianity just as an established religion, and the use of religion generally, no matter what your opinion about any one given religion is, but religion itself being the most potent and effective vehicle for the transmission of ethics and morality to the children. It cannot be done secularly. Secular transmission of morality and ethics inevitably leads to, or well, no, it doesn't inevitably lead to. It merely is moral relativism. In the absence of a religion, and an approach to something resembling a human consensus on morality similar to the results of the Nuremberg trials, then the Nazis were okay because they were just doing something that they were culturally comfortable with. So that's a whole other thing. Damn it, Steve. You in the comments there. Well, since Steve distracted me, I'll try to get back on track in just a minute, but I'll go ahead and deal with a couple of these comments because love you, brother. Dave Bowen mentioned before I got off the books that we should be buying hard copies of encyclopedias at a garage sale. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? Well, since you said that, I'm going to, right now, while we're on the air, I'm going to find an encyclopedia on Amazon. And I'll drop you a link in the description for that. in just a second, okay? And it would probably not be a bad idea. Good God! The World Book Encyclopedia 2020 hardcover, 22-volume set, 17,000 articles, $999. That one's probably going to wait a minute. Last year's edition is only $799. So, yes, old encyclopedias and new encyclopedias if you can find them. Okay. I will drop a few encyclopedias in the description down there for you guys, and hopefully you can get your hands on one. Here's the 2015 version, is $430. Woo, buddy. Yeah, go buy them at the yard sales. I'll sell them to you. But yeah, Dave, you ain't wrong. Go to the garage sales. I can buy them for me. I'd love to take a commission on those books, but shit. So, damn, Dave, just do that. Why don't you? But here, encyclopedia. I know, I got quiet for a minute. You guys are waiting on me to run my mouth some more. Okay, so, there it is. You can go buy the $1,000 encyclopedia from the link below. If anybody does, I'll send you a white hat. And yes, okay, so Dave says old versions are less likely to be infected by revisionists. Absolutely, 100%. Earlier this week, I don't know if you saw, I think it was Tuesday, Dave, I broke out my two, I have a couple of old dictionaries here. I have several, but the two that I broke out, one of them's a 50-year-old, well, now 60-year-old copy of Funk and Wagnall, and then I broke out a 120-year-old Webster's and pointed out that in the 56-year-old Funk and Wagnall, the definitions of racism and fascism are very different than what they are today, especially if you're looking on the internet, where they keep updating both of those definitions to just more and more clearly. Basically, it just says white people under both of them. It's like, if they both mean white people, why don't you just say white people? But whatever. I pointed that out, and then of course in the much older Webster's from Prohibition era. Actually, no, I think my Webster's is printed before the Prohibition. Anyway, in that old Webster's, the words racism and fascism don't appear because, they predate Mussolini. What do you know? I'm not suggesting that Mussolini coined the word racism, but obviously he gave us fascism. I think it would be worth having an old, it's like a new priest and an old priest. If you want to exercise the SJWs, you can show them what they think and show them what they thought, and all of a sudden they'll thought combust. So, all that to say, we have too many laws. If a law does not explicitly define and forbid the causing of an explicit harm, it is not a legitimate law. It's not. It is therefore a law which is unconstitutional and illegitimate. That is true of every measure of prohibition. That is true of every instance of a licensing law. Crime is harm. Law causes crime. And I'm not even making an argument for anarchism. I'm making an argument for minarchism. 100%. Absolute minimum interference by outside forces. Now, if I had my way, the only law would be that contracts are sacrosanct. That's it. I wouldn't even have a law forbidding murder. It's not useful. It doesn't prevent murder. All it does is prevent, at best, murder being illegal prevents victims from seeking vengeance. That's the best you could say about it. So, that said, let's get into the show since I've already been running from my mouth for 25 minutes. Let's talk about the stuff I wanted to talk about. So, Biloxi resident fatally shoots intruder, police say. Like I said, this intruder intruded on a person's private home with some intent. I don't care what that intent was, to commit a murder, to commit a rape, to steal property, to vandalize property. Whatever that intent was, it was to some degree murder, because it would deprive a person of the exchequable properties which had replaced some portion of his life and effort. This intruder attempted to commit murder and was killed for his trouble. According to the Biloxi Police Department, they received a 911 call at 1:10 from a Biloxi resident who shot an intruder at their home located at Old Bay Road. When police arrived, they found the alleged trespasser in the backyard of the house with a gunshot wound, later after identified as a 15-year-old. The investigation is initial thus far, but at the moment, investigators say the deceased did not break into the Biloxi residence during the confrontation. Family members of the homeowner immediately called 911. No charge has been filed. I think I grabbed a different article. Okay, well, this, and I mean, it's tragic. You've got a 15-year-old boy dead at the scene after having attempted to commit a crime. And it breaks my heart. I mean, 15-year-old boy. And that's it. He gave it up. He quit life. He surrendered his right to live when he compromised someone else's right to live. So, that said, let's take a look at the rest of the world for a moment. Y'all remember these guys, the McCloskeys? And I know that this is a little bit old news now. In fact, this article is from nearly a week ago. Yeah, it's from Tuesday. Updated on Wednesday. Okay. Or no, it's from Monday, updated on Tuesday. Anyway, so the McCloskeys were out in their front yard with guns to defend their home, their private property, from every time I hear somebody say the words peaceful protester, I just want to slap them in the face. Nobody who is using the phrase peaceful protesters today is mistaken. They are lying. It's an important distinction. They're not wrong. They're deliberately propagandizing in active support of terrorism, of violent, dangerous, neo-Marxist, ethno-supremacist, anti-American, domestic terrorism. I will go so far as to say that under Article 3, Section 3 of our beloved Constitution, there are a lot of reporters right now who should be hanged every time they say peaceful protesters, because what they're doing is offering aid and support to the treasonous enemies of the United States of America. If these were Chinese invaders or Russian army, we wouldn't be talking about treason on behalf of the violent protesters, the violent rioters. Okay? We'd be talking about acts of war. What we're talking about with BLM is treason. We're talking about citizens of the United States conducting militarized insurgency operations against the citizens, the government, and the law enforcement officers of the United States government. And yes, Dave, you're correct. The AG Barr and the governor out there both say that the charges should be dropped, and the governor said that he'll pardon them if they're not. Because this is an obvious use of legitimate force. Let's not mix words here. We know about the protesters. They don't have any more pictures of the scene. We've seen the video, and there's a crowd of protesters. This video is not from those protesters. But this video is of the protesters of the same organization. This is in Chicago earlier this week. These are the people we're dealing with, right? Watch right here as this big crowd of people comes down the street. And then, oh, look at that. A bunch of them are peeling off into the wood line. And what do? They peel off into the wood line. They pop up umbrellas and get behind these barricades. And you watch it happen right here. Homeboy runs in, dumps out a shopping bag. They're getting dressed in black bloc, right? Yes, Steve, I would like to see the McCloskeys get some education in weapons handling. But they were still perfectly within their rights to defend themselves. And let's be very clear about who they're defending themselves from. Okay, so you saw Homeboy get dressed in black bloc. All these guys, they showed up as protesters. Then they come in here they've got these shopping bags, right? And what do? They pull out black bloc. That's dress in all black and put on black masks. And they pull out these umbrellas to use to hide their identities. Same thing with these barricade boards. And then what do? They come up to here where the cops are standing guard around the statue. Are you seeing this? These guys they're not just throwing rocks and bottles. They're throwing homemade incendiary devices. They're throwing fire bombs and Molotov cocktails at these officers. Okay, some of those are just fireworks and whatnot, but these are weapons. What just floors me is that this was allowed to go on and the officers did not return fire. The correct answer here was 100%. These officers should have drawn their weapons and fired into the umbrellas. Period. There shouldn't be a man standing alive under those umbrellas. It's not just that they're attacking police officers. Okay, we've talked a bit on this show before about how I feel about police officers. I have this concern about police officers and politicians, that before one can put on the badge or swear the oath of office to serve in those positions, one has to first believe that men ought to be governed. Which is a sentiment I cannot entirely agree with, but I don't entirely discount. So I have some trepidation in that, right? I have some concern there. But if you attack armed men with weapons, you have just signed up to be shot by armed men with weapons. Because the point to carrying a weapon at the most basic level is to defend yourself. These officers absolutely should have defended themselves against these violent insurgent terrorists. These are not criminals. Okay, make no mistake. These BLM activists, these are not criminals. These are insurgents. These are an occupying army. They should be treated like enemy combatants. And so I'm going to end on this. I'm going to talk a little bit about Operation Legend. I need to give some more thought and study to the question of constitutionality. There are arguments being made by the lefties that Operation Legend is unconstitutional. I don't think that's correct. And I think that the determining factor there really is whether or not these violent terrorists that call themselves Black Lives Matter should be classified as an insurgent force. Because obviously, if they should be classified as an insurgent force, then the only mistake that's being made with Operation Legend is instead of federal officers being deployed in a law enforcement action, we should be deploying active military to conduct wartime activities against an occupying insurgency force. And okay, Steve says, I still believe there is a distinction between the umbrella crowd and the massive crowd that did not take part in that would be the backstop if that shoot happens. False. Full stop. False. If you fly the BLM flag, if you actively support BLM, you may believe that what you are doing is you are uttering the innocuous and not disagreeable statement that Black Lives Matter. But that's the point. That's why the name of the organization, of the neo-Marxist anti-American terrorist organization, is Black Lives Matter. Precisely so that they can get you out in the street saying Allahu Akbar, so that when they blow up your cities, they can tell the press that you supported it, that you wanted it. So as long as you go out and fly the flag and say Black Lives Matter on all your social media, what you are doing is you are creating the support image, which the BLM organization then gets to use as the evidence for the popularity of their movement when they demand that the police be abolished, that reparations be paid, that white people be forcibly evicted from their homes and those homes given to black and brown people, that heterosexual marriages be dissolved under the law. That is a specific demand of the organization, by the way. That the traditional Western family be dissolved. You cannot say the words Black Lives Matter as a vote of support without offering your voice to empower this exact terrorist organization. If you're there, if you are in the street protesting with these people, you are part of a violent riot. You are there voluntarily at an event which you cannot reasonably expect to not become a violent riot. It's that simple. So no, your safety as a participant in one of these events is not my concern. My concern is the safety of a nation of free men who are under siege by radical Marxist insurgents. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to start wrapping it up and put a pen in it right there, because I might need to go check my blood pressure. Y'all, it's Friday. I think it is Friday, right? We can disagree about opinions all day, Steve. I'm stating facts. These are tactical, analytical facts. Incontrovertible, inignorable. There's not a counterposition to be had. So I'm going to wrap it up here. It is Friday. We're going into the weekend, so I'll throw you a safety brief. Don't drive drunk. Don't fry bacon naked. And don't leave the house without your daily carry. I love you. Be safe out there. And keep on doing what you do. Make sure you buy the books. Buy the books. Buy the books.